I'm Brad Tolinski, former editor of Guitar World and current author of MC5, the biography of rock's most revolutionary band, and I am a CGO.
Always saying guitars are playing a part of who we are. Got a cool job, but there's so much more to the chairmen and women of the pedal board. You're a CGO, Chief Guitar Officer.
The show where success meets guitar.
Welcome to Chief Guitar Officer. I'm Scott Haidt.
And I'm Judd Silver. Scott, what made you start playing guitar?
Well, it was a lot cooler than the clarinet I was playing in fourth grade, that's for sure. And then 2 years later, I got demoted to bass clarinet. But there was hope. MTV came out, and that really changed everything for me. Seeing the visual of these bands connected to the songs I already loved so much on the radio, in particular seeing the guitar players, I was hooked.
Yeah, that is very powerful, that image. I mean, there's a million reasons why people start playing guitar, or probably 3 reasons why people start playing guitar. But what it really comes down to is the guitar is one of the ultimate symbols of creative expression.
And guitars are cool. Yeah. Painter has a canvas, a chef has a knife and ingredients.
Yeah, and like those other things, it's possible to build a career around guitar.
Yeah, I mean, there's some amazing things. People build like guitar pedals and equipment for guitarists to use. There's music educators, and then there's the pro musicians themselves.
Our guest today has built an entire career out of encouraging creativity through the guitar. He was the editor-in-chief of Guitar World magazine, the world's best-selling musicians magazine for over 25 years. He's written books on Jimmy Page, on Eddie Van Halen. He has a new book coming out on the MC5, which we'll hear about. He's done live event interviews with every guitar player you can imagine. But all of it centered around encouraging creativity through the guitar. Scott, tell us who our guest is today.
Really excited to welcome one of the top authorities on all things guitar, Brad Tolinski. And guess what? He's a CGO.
Respected journalist and author. Editorial director. An original guitar content creator. CGO. Brad Tolinski, welcome to Chief Guitar Officer.
Well, I'll take all of that. Thanks, guys, for having me on.
Brad, where are you right now?
I'm in the greatest city in the world, New York City. Awesome. I don't have any problem making that proclamation.
Okay, Brad, the book, October 8th, MC5, an oral biography of rock's most revolutionary band. I just want to read you a little list here. Iggy Pop, Bob Seger, Alice Cooper, Jack White, you, and the MC5. What is in the water in Detroit? How did this book come together?
Well, the story of the book, it's pretty weird. It's wild in itself. There was this great writer in Detroit named Ben Edmonds. He was one of the editors of Creem Magazine, and he was a huge MC5 fanatic and had interviewed the guys many times over the years and had always sort of threatened to write a book. You know, unfortunately, he contracted cancer, and on his one of his last wishes was he reached out to another journalist named Jaan Uhelszki, who is also a legendary Creem Magazine editor, and said, Jaan, I have one request. Help me put together this MC5 book. I've been putting together a book, and I just really was, want to get this thing done. And so Jaan thought she was basically going to get a manuscript from Ben, that she would just edit and take to a, publishing house. But only he just had these file cabinets just full of stuff. And it was all handwritten, nothing on computer. Wow. And it was mostly interviews that he had conducted. And they were great interviews, but it wasn't anywhere near being a book or anything publishable. So Jaan was sort of intimidated by the project, and she called me and said, do you think, you can help me out with this? So we spent like close to, good 6 or 7 months first just getting stuff transcribed, and then spent another year sort of putting it together. And there was a lot of work involved in that, and just creating this, a narrative structure. And So we did like, I don't know, got basically a third of the book done. Jaan and I worked on it together and took it to the publishers. And initially, nobody was really that interested in it. So I set it aside and I did a book on Eddie Van Halen, which came out a couple years ago, Eruption, which did incredibly well. And so my publisher said, well, what else you got? and I went back to the manuscript and the stuff we'd worked on. And I was like, this is the most outrageous, completely crazy rock story ever. And I've heard a lot of them through my years. And so I took it back to my publisher and I said, look, guys, just read what I have so far. And if you don't think that this book is amazing, forget it. And so they read it and they were like, my God, this is a great story. And the material you guys got is fantastic. So we started working on it again. And it ended up taking a good, 3 or 4 years to really turn this book into what it became, because we had to do a lot of stuff. We had to fill in tons of missing blanks. We had to do new interviews. We had to, create this narrative. And what was cool about getting the Ben stuff is that he got to interview a lot of people who are no longer with us. Mm. So these people's stories would never have existed. Mm-hmm. But the book is so exciting and so outrageous. And in the headline, we call it Rock's Most Revolutionary Band. Now, that could sound like bullshit, sort of, hyperbole or something like that. But when you really look at the MC5, they invented like punk rock, they pioneered heavy metal, and then they were cultural revolutionaries too. It was very politically fraught time. They were part of this political organization called the White Panthers Party, that was, anti-racism, anti-war, pro-cannabis, all this stuff. Just have this fantastic story of its music, its politics, it's this, it's that,
From your perspective as a longtime music fan and writer, you've done so many things. Did you besides all your writing and editorial skills, did you have any big fandom in it too, towards the band as a Detroit native yourself?
Well, growing up in Michigan, these guys were... along with the Stooges, they were our Bruce Springsteen, whatever, but during this process, I got a whole new appreciation for what they had done. I mean, like you listen to it now and it feels a little crude, but at the time it was like a spaceship landing from outer space. I mean, if you compare the MC5's Kick Out the Jams record, which is total like rock and roll chaos, to even like the Stones sound like grandma music,
From the same exact time period.
Yeah, same exact time period, So you really, when you compare, you really understand how ahead of the game these guys were.
So Brad, you've made an enormous contribution to shining a light on the importance of guitar in culture. I mean, the books that you've written, you mentioned Eddie Van Halen. You've done books on Jimmy Page. You did the book Play It Loud on literally the importance and how cool the guitar is in culture, right?
Yep.
Podcasts, live events, backstory, and of course, editing the #1 selling musicians magazine of all time, Guitar World, for 25 years. What are your thoughts on the current state of guitar today, where its place is in culture?
I mean, guitar playing has never been better or in many ways more innovative. Mm-hmm. You just have all these people really pushing the limits of what you can do in terms of technique. And you have manufacturers who are creating these great wild 8-string instruments. And then you have amplification companies like, Positive Grid with the Spark amp and all that stuff, the technology and the technique and the playing it's never been better or healthier. Mm-hmm. But culturally, rock music isn't quite where it's at these days. It's shifted. It's more about pop music and it's more, about hip hop and R&B and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But, I've always been a little bit more comfortable with the underground. It's right? It's like better to be the underdog somehow. Like that's where rock and roll should be. I don't think it's dead or anything because you go up online and people are playing rock music all over the place.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like the proliferation of all of these influencers now, people on YouTube, people on Instagram, social media that are performing, and guitar is certainly like a focal point of all of that. You've been there since the beginning of all this because the magazine, that was like the one place you went, the focal point for all things guitar. Its importance in culture is still there. It's just not in one spot.
It was really interesting. I was thinking about this, about coming on your show and trying to explain a little bit about what I've done and, over the years. And part of me and part of the idea of Guitar World, this didn't start right in the beginning, but very soon afterwards, this was the direction I was trying to take it in. So Guitar World to me was an opportunity not just to write about guitar, this instrument that we all love, but I also thought it was like a really, really great opportunity to reach out to young people, especially guys, and encourage them to be creative because very few people they don't encourage young guys to be creative. You know what I mean? Like there's very few outlets that are sort of like that. Mm-hmm. Guys are sort of pushed into sports or cars or this or that. The idea of all of a sudden, being a musician or being a writer or a poet or anything, that's not something that was encouraged. And so Guitar World to me was a vehicle to encourage young people to be creative, to give them something really cool to read, like to get young people to read. That's also like impossible. Yeah, so, right. We had to create something super entertaining in order to draw people in. And I think that was a key. I mean, it wasn't just me. I had a great staff of people. Judd is, as you well know, Tom Bouchard, Jeff Kitts, Harold Steinblatt, all these people, They were lunatics, they were so much fun. And I think that was the reason that, that iteration of Guitar World in particular was so well embraced. I mean, at one point we were selling more copies in Walmart, which was the world's newsstand, United States' biggest newsstand, than Rolling Stone or Entertainment Weekly or any of that stuff. Yeah. And I think it's mostly because that was it. For sure. It was as much about that as it was like, this Stratocaster or that Les Paul. Yeah,
well, that's what I meant about celebrating the guitar as like a cultural focal point. Still to this day, the effect of that is felt, and it still has that.
I hope so. I mean, we try to keep the educational stuff undercover. Right. You don't want anybody to know that they're being, but we really cared about the way it read and how it was edited and all that stuff.
I think a lot of what you ended up in that time giving back is this really sense of community. It had a huge impact in how we looked at the world and tried to have our creativity, and everyone was pretty cool to each other. There's obviously some competitiveness, just like a football player. The top shredding guitar player might have the sense of competition, but outside of that, I feel like people that are musicians and put that time there, I really think that's something that's, I think, shaped a lot of us.
Oh yeah, no, being in a band, I mean, that was my social world growing up. It was sort of like it wasn't something that you did in isolation. It was playing music is a communal experience,
That's right.
And it was also a way to reach out to other kids that were also, being creative and using their imagination in a different kind of way. And you could still be cool doing it. You know what I mean? That was the other bonus. The truth was, back in 1990 when I started, it was a predominantly male audience. Mm-hmm. And that was the interesting thing. That was the complicated thing, is like, how do you get a young guy to sit down and read something, buy a magazine? I mean, I think that's sort of the interesting thing now, is that now it has evolved, and a lot of the more interesting rock bands that are coming up now are fronted by women. also a super interesting audience for the guitar. Another thing I would say about Guitar World is that in many ways it was sort of a love letter to my 13-year-old self. Like I when I was editing the magazine, I was thinking about, what did I need? Because I had nothing,
Right, it's for you. Yeah.
It was a wilderness out there,
Right.
I mean, you had to slow down the record at 60 RPM and figure out, and there was no, internet, people showing you what a finger vibrato was.
No, it was basically the radio. I mean, there was no MTV yet. It was just.
It was just a horse and buggy. Like
early days of you playing guitar, like you as a guitar player, you mentioned maybe some bands you had. Like, what was the early experience of that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that by learning the way I did, which was no transcriptions, no nothing, you had to really, really super focus on the music itself.
Mm-hmm.
You were so like tuned into the slightest little nuances, because you had to study it that hard in order to figure out how to play it. And that ended up serving me well. Later on, I did an entire book of my interviews with Jimmy Page.
Yep.
I think I knew his music almost as well as he did because of how hard I studied it and tried to learn. I grew up in Taylor, Michigan. And by some miracle, there were a couple of older guys that to this day, I don't even know how they really knew it without the information that we had today, but they seem to know like a lot about everything, like even the differences between pickups and stuff like that. And they knew how to play, in bar chords and finger vibratos and stuff. And I just used to I used to just trail along these guys until they would basically kick me out and get rid of me, know.
Do you remember, like, is that the point in time, like when the power of the guitar first hit you? Was it a record that you heard? Was it something that they showed you?
Yeah, I mean, probably it goes back to watching the Ozzy and Harriet show.
Oh, really?
And seeing Ricky Nelson play the guitar on it in the malt shop. And I was like, wow, that's pretty awesome, And so I can remember that. I think the first record that I heard that I was like, I want to be able to do that, or what are they doing, was the Everly Brothers, Kathy's Clown. But then my first record I bought with my own money was Tommy by The Who. And I thought, well, that guy's just Townshend, is pretty much just playing rhythm guitar. I can at least do that. I might not be able to do this other stuff. So that was, that and the Beatles, these song books that we had with just the chord figures.
What's amazing about it, though, is that the impact that it had on you at that time, right? It set you forth in that motion. Yeah. Then you were able to translate that into eventually playing in bands and coming to New York and being at Guitar World and starting this whole prolific career all around that. And then what you've really done successfully is impact other people.
Yeah, I had a creative impulse. That was a thing, is I knew I wanted to play music or entertain or do something in the arts. Mm-hmm. And the guitar, what can a poor boy do but play in a rock and roll band? The guitar was sort of the vehicle. That was my out, It was a way that you could be creative. To me, it's always been that vehicle.
Absolutely. Oh, man. Well, all this guitar talk, maybe you share a guitar with us. I'm sure you have one or two or seven. So
I'm fairly monogamous when it comes to guitars.
I respect that.
I don't have a huge selection because I really think it takes maybe about 3 or 4 years for you to really know an instrument. I mean, to really play it, to really get the most out of it. I'm like a little old school that way. I always feel like, these guys that just throw around guitars, it's just... So I don't have as big of a collection. I have stuff from most of the major food groups, but the guitar that I wanted to share with you was actually one of the last guitars that I ended up getting while I was at Guitar World.
Okay.
And I think the last Cover Story interview, I did, it all sort of came together was with Joan Jett. So anyways, I got this guitar from this company called Rock and Roll Relics.
Oh, yeah, great.
And they were making really cool.
So cool, man.
Yeah, this, like, just check the pick art on this. So awesome.
So cool.
It's beat up in all sort of right ways. So I was like, I've got a banana yellow melody maker, and I've got Joan Jett here. I've got to get Joan Jett to sign my freaking guitar. So
great. Great.
So this is the only signed guitar I own. And
Nice.
I don't know, somehow it's just, I love rock and roll, and Joan Jett, and she was so badass, and Johnny Thunder's decals and shit on it. But
Nice.
anyways, it says, Brad, rock this sucker, Joan Jett. So this was
very cool. Let's see that headstock. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, those guys, that's a cool guitar, man. That is a real rock and roll machine.
It's a rock and roll machine. And it doesn't just look cool. It actually, kicks some serious ass, as they say.
So, Brad, thank you for taking the time. Where do people find you? The book, October 8th, MC5. Where do they look for it?
You can buy the book. You just type in MC5, Brad Tolinski, or whatever online, and a bunch of different places will come up.
Okay.
And for my homies in Detroit, I am going to do this crazy book release party in Detroit at the Detroit Institute of Arts, which is
cool.
The big museum in Detroit. And we're going to have this great garage rock band called the Detroit Cobras, legendary Detroit garage rock band playing.
Is there a date set for that event, and can people find out about it anywhere?
Yeah, it's going to be, you just type in Detroit Institute of Arts or DIA, and it's for free until we can't fit any more people in. And it's going to be on Friday, October 11.
Brad, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. Incredible story. You've been a great guest.
Okay. Thank you, Judd. Nice meeting you, Scott.
That's our show. Thanks for watching. And remember to like and subscribe to our channel. Check us out on all the socials at Chief Guitar Officer.
And we want you on the show. Go to chiefguitarofficer.com, look for the section called You're a CGO, send us your video, and be featured on a future episode. Just like this.
I'm Adam Reifsnyder. I play with Honeybucket, the Fare-Duells, and as a solo musician. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. This is my Guild D150 acoustic guitar, and I am a CGO.